I told several people this morning that when Vera was alive, she never wanted me to bring her flowers. She always would say that I was the flower of the family. But she put it another way. She always said I was a blooming idiot, so I... Oh, we want to appreciate all members that are here this morning. I wonder how many of you brought Arthur with you this morning. I know that several of you mentioned to me that you have. And I feel Arthur beside me right now, and I do appreciate the fact that we ought to double our attendance this morning because everybody has Arthur with them. So. Mother's Day. Isn't it wonderful? I want to share something with you, and I don't want to embarrass anybody. But I shared with some of the people last Sunday morning this idea. My kids, it all started with Steve. Every year on their birthday would always buy their mother a gift. And a thank you for giving them life. Thank you, Mom, for giving me life. And I didn't know this, but after this service, and we had our ice cream and cake last Sunday morning, I drove out to the cemetery to visit my wife's grave. And there was a bouquet of roses on her grave that Steve went out that morning before church and put a bouquet of roses on her grave. Isn't that a good idea? Great idea. One word of explanation. There is a poem in the papers that I passed out today with my message. I just had the space and I thought I would throw that in. I might use it this morning, I'm not sure. Now somebody told me, says, that's not a Mother's Day poem, it shouldn't be there. I'm not going to say it was Debbie. But let me give you a little bit of background on this. When I was in Bible college, I happened to know one of the vice presidents of the Jones and Laughlin Steel Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I was assured of a summer job, regardless of whether they were hiring or not, just because of my relationship with that particular man. But it was one summer that I was filling in at the First Christian Church in Pittsburgh, which is our fellowship. And their preacher was sick and took a leave of absence. And we were working the night shift this particular week that began at 11, 12 o'clock midnight and worked through to 8 o'clock in the morning, which is a little bit different than around here. And I was working on a sermon based on Romans 1:16, which is, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. I had a real good relationship with a group of black people that was there. They were gospel quartet that worked together, they sang together, they went to church together and so forth. And Bill Hines is one of the lead singer of that particular group, came by and sat beside me one night when I was working on this sermon. He said, Phil, what are you doing? And I said, I'm working on a sermon so I can preach Sunday morning. He says, what's the sermon going to be about? And I told him, Romans 1:16. About a half hour later, he came by to me and says, can you use this? And it was this poem that's in there. And I said, I sure can. It captured every thought that I had told him that I was working on with putting my sermon, every thought. So I thought you would like to have it. So over 60 years ago, after I entered the ministry, every time Bill saw my dad who worked in that particular department, he asked about me, and we had a relationship for several years after I graduated from college. But let's think about Mother's Day. Do you know where Mother's Day began? It began in what city? Grafton. Who was the woman that started it?
Ann Jarvis.
Ann Jarvis, all right. What year was it?
100 years ago, I
No, it was not 100 years ago. She started in 1904.
so it's over.
It's that President Wilson in 1914 authorized it to be a national holiday, the second Sunday in May. Let me ask you another question. Are we the only country in the world that has Mother's Day? I saw one say, I don't know. I saw because it is amazing, and I have this information on my desk out there if you're interested. It is amazing that there are almost every culture and every country in the world today has a Mother's Day. Not on the second Sunday in May. Argentina, for instance, has it in October. Now, it's always in the springtime, and Argentina's in the southern hemisphere, which we, the springtime. Australia, I think, has it in May, I'm not sure. But there's a list of the countries in the particular time that they celebrate Mother's Day, and I think it's great. I think it's great that there is a day that we can honor the mothers that have given so much for their children and helping their children to grow. And I think one of the greatest things we have in the world today is mothers in the heart of the home, Mother's Day. During the past several weeks, I have been given a lot of thought as to how I wanted to handle my sermon this morning. It was a difficult decision because there were so many good examples that I could have used as far as mothers were concerned. But for somehow the theme of the widow of Nain who lost a son, I could not shake it. Here was a woman who knew Jesus. Her life was dramatically changed as a result of this knowledge of Jesus. And as a result of the change that took place in her life, there was a great blessing that she gained because she knew Jesus. Let's read that passage of Scripture, Luke, the 7th chapter. Luke, the 7th chapter, beginning with the 11th verse. And it came to pass that the day after, that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. Now when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And much people in the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, Weep not. And they came and touched the bier, and they that bare him stood still. And he said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak. And they delivered him to his mother. And there came a fear and awe, and they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, and that God had visited his people. What a beautiful story. The city of Nain was a town that was about 5 miles southeast of Nazareth. A small town. There is a village that sits on top of the ruins of this particular city. And there's been much archaeology that has been done around the city. Under the Mosaic law, a dead person or a dead body was unclean. And it was the custom that no dead body was allowed to be buried within the city walls and the city limits. And after the people would carry the body out to bury the body, under the Mosaic law, they had to go through a purifying ceremony that they might be made clean after being unclean from touching the dead body. So this is why there was this procession of people out of the city of Nain. And there are certain things that are implied by the Scriptures, that the Scriptures do not really come out and explain fully what was going on. Number one, the idea that she was a widow. Now, if you examine the culture of that particular day, there was no Social Security. There were no pensions. the widow would have to depend upon her family in order to be able to survive and to be able to eat and have her needs taken care of. And I want you to follow the statement of the scriptures. Here was a widow whose only son had died.